and here to give you the lowdown of what transpired there following the independent investigation into the whole disaster. The leadership from the Water Research Commission, and starting off with Dr. Muramto, and then she will.
We are here with a team of experts that supported this study, as well as an advisory committee members that were part of this project. As we all know that the recent outbreak in Hammanskraal was triggered by a case traveler allegedly from Limpopo, which was confirmed on the 15th and 18th of May 2023. Post through a directive from the Department of Water and Sanitation to undertake an independent study on the source of the cholera in order to ensure that the in connection with water affairs in the country. Since its establishment, the Water Research Commission has given dedicated focus to the generation of water sanitation and program, which is being implemented by the Department of Water and Sanitation. We have also developed manuals and guidelines and water efficient sanitation technologies in response to the prevailing service delivery challenges. We have also designed and continue to pilot National Water and Wastewater Surveillance Program, led organization, Dr. Yunus Advisory Committee. Dr. Yunus will now take you through the presentation of the findings of this study. Thank you.
Morning, everybody. Looking at the potential of cholera as a source from water. That's what we are focusing on for today. So in terms of introduction, I just wanted to first make sure that all of us in this room have an understanding of what exactly we were looking for in our source water. And what we were looking for is the bacteria Vibrio cholera. And specifically, we were looking for the toxigenic strain of that bacteria. So cholera is a diarrheal disease. You get cholera when you are exposed to fecally contaminated water or food, and you unfortunately put that and you're able to put that on your mouth, and you're able to also get infected that way. So the roots of infection for the organism can be very different. It can be from water, it can be from food, it can be from each other. The diarrhea that's associated with cholera regularly, and I'm sure if you look at the South African Water Quality Guidelines, cholera is not there, but we use E. coli as an indicator for that. So water with cholera in it or food, it goes into your system, and that's where it grows and that's where it multiplies. So in our aquatic environment, it doesn't multiply, it stays there. But once it reaches a human body, it then multiplies, you get diarrhea. And obviously, if stool unfortunately gets into our water resources, then anybody who comes in contact with that stool, there's a likelihood that you might get the organism. So what we were looking for specifically in this study is to test our sources to make sure that there was no toxigenic form of the Vibrio cholera strain. I think that's what's important here. Then in terms of the background of the cholera outbreaks, I think it's important outbreaks surrounding us. So we had Tanzania, Zambia, Zimbabwe having an outbreak, and then most importantly to Malawi. And Malawi currently has the largest outbreak on the continent as we speak. The NICD and obviously Department of Health in February with 6 cases that were confirmed to be cholera, and 3 of those cases came from outside the country, whilst 3 of the other cases were acquired locally. And I think also if you had heard the rain and came back. So you can see that we do have cholera outside, and there's a potential for cholera to come into the country in a different way or into our communities. I think it's also important to know that South Africa is not endemic for cholera. It's not something that we see regularly. Most of the outbreaks that we've had so far have been linked to importation events. And also, we have a new strain that is moving around, and the NICD confirmed that, and that strain has not been seen on the African continent, and it originates from Southeast Asia. So preventing and managing to protect our public from getting the disease, safe drinking water and sanitation infrastructure, so that people contained, it's not exposed to the environment, they're able to wash their hands as well if they do come into contact with it appropriately, because that is where you would find basically organisms from our fecal matter. Drinking water also has to be safe, and we have the South African, the SANS 241, which is our drinking water quality standards, which we follow, and we make sure that there's no E. coli in there. Monitoring of climate variables is also really important for cholera. We know that heavy rainfall is linked to increase in cholera outbreaks, as well as drought, because there's a minimizing of water that is used. Improving access to oral rehydration solution is also really key. So cholera is a disease that can actually be controlled if people have quick access to treatment. Infection prevention control in our healthcare facilities. Once again, it means that our healthcare facilities must be able to have good quality water to use. And then risk communication to our communities, to make sure that the behavior patterns that they are involved in do not exacerbate the spread. So I think methodology point of view, why we asked certain questions that we asked. So we received a directive from the DWS, and then the Water Research Commission developed the terms of reference from that directive. In the terms of reference, we did appoint an advisory panel made up of 8 individuals located all over the country, and then we also got information in terms of public health information from the National Institute of Communicable Diseases, as well as Department of Health. Then we had our work package teams who are with us here today, Cubic M Africa, who were looking at the risk mapping of water, sanitation, and hygiene services in the Hammanskraal area. We had virtual consulting engineers who were assessing the functionality of our drinking water treatment works, Temba, and then also the functionality of the 2 wastewater treatment works, Temba and Royville. We had the University of Pretoria, who were then exploring the link to food, so they looked at irrigation, water quality, and then also importantly, all samples were sent to accredited laboratories to be able to detect the toxicogenic Vibrio cholerae strain. And with that, I want to say that in the country right now, we have about 2 of those labs, and we used 1. But in terms of using our indicator, E. coli, we do have sufficient labs that are able to monitor for that. The investigation questions that were asked were, what is the status of the provision of safe water and sanitation, as well as solid waste management in the area? Could that have led to the spread? We also wanted to understand the general level of public awareness. So the importance of WASH, was it known in the community? Do they really understand how the disease is spread? We also wanted to understand the climatic conditions in Hammanskraal, because like I mentioned earlier, climate is really something that is important when it comes to the spread of cholera. Then also specifically at the time of the study, because we do know that organisms do not last forever in environments, especially our organisms that cause diseases, they are actually very fragile. So at the time of the study, we wanted to understand whether we could detect cholera in any, Vibrio cholera in any of our water sources, and if so, is there likelihood that you could get disease transmission from that? Then also, most importantly, because I think this is where a lot of the questions have been around, what was the functioning of our wastewater treatment works? Were they also responsible for spreading cholera? Because obviously, if they're not treating wastewater adequately, then there's a chance for that. And if so, were they also treating water to the acceptable effluent or standard limits that we want? So we can now just head into the results since we've gone through the investigation questions. So in terms of our climate variables in the Hammanskraal area at the time of the outbreak, there was above average rainfall. In fact, in the month of February, we received about 3-fold what the rainfall usually is in that area for that month. Air temperature was also favorable for the growth of the organism. So that means that if the organism was in the environment, it would survive, right? And then also in terms of the presence of blue-green algae and water hyacinth. So we do see a lot of blue-green algae on our dam surfaces, and blue-green algae and water hyacinth were both present in the Lupil Dam, where abstraction takes place, as well as the Penis River. And those algae as well as the water hyacinth, we know that they are carriers of Vibrio cholera, so the bacteria likes to attach to them. So in terms of our environmental conditions, it was favorable for the survival of the organism if it was present in the environment. If we look at the runoff from solid waste dumps as well as sewage overflows, so in that area there are a lot of illegal dumping sites. I think our work package, we have some nappies and stuff on them, which obviously has a fecal component to that. And then on top of that too, there were sewer overflows as well happening in the community. What we did find though was high levels of E. coli in all the samples that we analyzed. We also found 2 other bacteria that do have the potential to cause gastrointestinal disease. It wasn't confirmed that they did, but they do have the potential, Salmonella and Shigella. But then we also did not find cholera in any of these sites that were monitored. Then we're looking at the water sources and storage facilities in the Hammanskraal area. You will see that there's a whole range of different kinds of sources. So some people get their water, the RDP, those living in the RDP and township, they do get some of their water from the Temba drinking water treatment plant. Some get from a run water pipeline through tankers. Some get from the Cliff Drip water treatment plant, and then some also buy bottled water from stores, and then some have their private boreholes as well, where they access groundwater. This slide is really important because in an outbreak, you want to be able to quickly identify the source. And if you have a community that uses various types of water from different sources, then it's very difficult to track that outbreak. So in the case of Hammanskraal, this would be a situation where it would be very difficult to track where the source would be coming from. And secondly, also, when you do store water at home, it increases your chances of contaminating that water. So then if you do have cholera present, then it spreads easily. In this case, it's also, you also have intermittent supply of water. So it's not just the quality of water that is really important, but it's also the amount of water that the community is receiving, which is really key. Then we also looked at the assessment of sanitation and hygiene facilities. So like I emphasized earlier, you do want to, as much as possible, keep people away from their fecal matter because that is where the organism resides. In Hammanskraal area, you have flush toilets inside the main house. You do also have some flush toilets that are located outside. You also have flush station facilities that were looked at, and none of them really can be considered improved because in some cases water was not flowing, so people could not flush. In some cases, they're not like there are a huge number of people sharing one facility. So, for instance, in a case where the flush toilet is not working, then people will have to resort to other sanitation facilities to use, for instance, like a pit. In the pit latrines that were found there were no hand washing facilities for most of the households, or they were very far away. So that means that even if people had diarrhea, they can't wash their hands immediately. It takes them a long distance to travel to wash hands. There were also chemical toilets as well. Once again, no hand washing facilities, and we do know that is important to stop spread. And then flush toilets also were connected to septic tanks with limited wash basins as well. In terms of finding the bacteria in the Apis River, so the Apis River is a river that runs in the Hammanskraal community. There was Vibrio cholera detected only once in a grab sampling that was downstream of the Hammanskraal area. We did not find any cholera, which was upstream, from the sample upstream, the Rooiwel wastewater treatment plant, as well as the neutral dam. In terms of downstream of Rooiwel, there was also Salmonella and Shigella, two organisms that also cause diarrheal diseases. And then there was also a very high concentration of your E. coli bacteria. And like I indicated earlier, that E. coli is the bacteria we use to check if fecal matter might be present, and it was very high. So in terms of actually using the Apis River as for recreational activities, for cultural activities, for religious activities, which we know that the community of Hammanskraal does, we would say that those activities really put them at risk because they are unacceptably high levels of E. coli in that water. And we would urge that the community doesn't do that till that water quality of the Apis River improves. So now looking at our irrigation water, so there are a number of farms, and some of the farmers do use the Apis River as their source for irrigation water, or use sprays that offshoot from the Apis River or from other rivers upstream. And in the case we have found Vibrio cholera, we are still in the process of making sure that it is a toxigenic producing form, but it was found in one sample that was located in the Cal Plus Spruit irrigation water point. And just upstream of that spruit is a burst sewer pipe. So, I mean, obviously the thing is to understand whether that burst sewer pipe has cholera, Vibrio cholera, which obviously is then feeding into the irrigate pea farm. So you do have a pea farm there. We know that peas at least are a shelled crop and they need to be cooked before eating, so that reduces the risk there. And then if you look at the Spruit also flows into the Uppies River, which obviously is further downstream the Hammanskraal area as well. And then in terms of the Temba drinking water treatment plant, so in my earlier slide, I indicated that some members of the community receive their water from Temba. So Temba, obviously this is a summary of the results, the detailed results that the plant is producing water of drinking water quality standards. So other chemicals are also not being optimized. And then there's also just a general lack of proper process control and operation in that plant. Then in terms of the wastewater treatment plants, Temba wastewater treatment plant. Temba is the plant that takes wastewater from the Hammanskraal community. The functionality is partial, but the effluent does not meet standards for release. We did not find any cholera there. Critical issues for to sort of bring Temba up to speed is a lack of maintenance, and in some cases there's partial construction of some of the components of the plant. Then in terms of the Rooiwal wastewater treatment plant, Rooiwal wastewater is actually made up of 3 different works: Rooiwal Northern Works, Rooiwal Eastern Works, and Rooiwal Western Works. And that plant is completely dysfunctional. This was not only found by our investigation, but I think it's been reported and publicized, but the plant is operating above its design capacity. Large sections of the plant need to be overhauled, and in general there just needs to be a new master plan designed around the plant to make sure that it functions properly. So in terms of conclusions, we from this investigation can say that it remains unknown whether the water was the source of the cholera outbreak in the environment, and that is because obviously we got the grab sample downstream of Hammanskraal. However, if there was cholera in the environment, however it came into the community, the conditions in Hammanskraal do aid inefficiencies of the Temba and Rooiwal wastewater. That means that wastewater is not being treated. The community could be exposed to that because of the Uppies River and Temba water treatment plant. There's a lot of illegal dumping and poor solid waste management, which contributes also to the spread of, by that we are monitoring for high E. coli levels. There's obviously inadequate sanitation and hygiene infrastructure, especially in the informal and rural settlements. And then there's just generally a lack of awareness around the risks that lack of wash services pose. So understanding the different sort of pathways that I talked about. And this is not just in relation to cholera, but it's also for all waterborne diseases as well. So our recommendations then is to really make sure that there's a proper waste collection system in the area. Sewage infrastructure must be maintained, bearing in mind that we do have now extreme weatherfall patterns. We don't know when the next heavy rains, for instance, are coming. Sanitation and hygiene facilities that are available need to be maintained, and I think that's also an issue in the Hammanskraal area. Like I pointed out, they have flush toilets, but then they don't have water for flushing. So basically, it's almost like you don't have any sanitation facilities. Then effective source water protection measures are really important, because where you're abstracting your water from, like the Leeuwipil Dam, need to be protected to make sure that you don't also overburden your plants when it comes to treating water for drinking purposes. Temba drinking water treatment plant must be operated according to standard procedure, and I think the Blue Drop requirements outline exactly how drinking water treatment plants must function. In relation to also the Rooiwal and Temba wastewater treatment plant works, Green Drop also requirements state exactly how what standards the wastewater treatment plants must meet. So with Rooiwal and Temba, they need to be refurbished and recommissioned urgently to prevent the environment, especially the Uppies River, from turning basically into a sewer, and then upgraded and ultimately to make sure that you achieve best environmental practice there. Then there should be a quick response from a multi-sectoral team when outbreaks occur. Like I mentioned earlier, there are different routes through which people can get cholera. It's not only from water and food, even person-to-person interaction as well. But once cholera is here, there needs to be quick response in terms of making sure that people have access to treatment and so forth. risk communication also to the public is very important. And I think here I just want to stress that a lot of gains were made during COVID-19 in getting our public to really understand how disease transmission works. And I think it's something that we need to capitalize on. Our communities have the ability to understand this knowledge, and we shouldn't lose that momentum that COVID-19 brought in terms of knowledge assimilation. So with that, I would just like to acknowledge Cubicam Africa, who did the WASH risk mapping, virtual consulting engineers, who looked at our treatment plants, and the University of Pretoria, who looked at irrigation water quality. I would like to also thank the advisory panel. Like I said, there are about 8 members of the advisory panel, but today with us here is Ms. Leanne Kotze and also Prof. Juanis Venter. Then all the personnel at the various plants who provided information and data, as well as obviously the community of Hammanskraal. I also want to just end that, like the CEO of the Water Research Commission alluded to in her opening, the WRC has a lot of knowledge, and we have an open public platform that anybody can basically access this knowledge through. So if you go to our website, the Knowledge Hub, you should be able to access information and download that information with regard to any water-related research. And with that, I'll just like to thank you all for listening.
Thank you, thanks, Doc. That, colleagues, is the results on the independent assessment of the water in Hammanskraal following the outbreak of the cholera in May. Time for questions and answers from the panel, and that applies to France, the people that have joined virtually. Who takes the first one? Any questions? Yes.
Hi guys, I'm Mariska from The Citizen. So I wanted to find out, we've seen all of this, we hear you guys, but at Rooibal, when the president visited there, to check it out, I remember that, everyone was following the president to the Temba Stadium to listen to his speech, and I stayed behind and I walked around the Rooibal plant, and I discovered the pipe where all the dirty water is being dumped into the Alpies River, like it's this big of a pipe and there's water going in a speed into that river. But if it's not the, dankie toch, dis nie die cholera nie, but I mean, what I saw there scares me. So, who's going to do something about it?
Okay, we will take at least 3 at a time. Any more questions for this round? Yes.
Yes, it's Lerato Moza from Power FM. I'm also a resident of Hammanskraal. I just wanted to check, with regards to your investigations, that the tests from the water supplied by the city via water tankers, was that conducted, and what was the results coming from that? And also, did you also include the water that's actually being bought from your spaza shops as well? Did your investigation from part of it?
Okay, one more. Franz, any question, Rachel? Okay, well, let's allow them to answer the 2 for now.
Yes, thank you very much for the question around who's responsible for changing the situation and doing something about it. I think in South Africa we've got a very unique obviously the infrastructure around who has the responsibility. So at the national level, the custodian is the minister of the Department of Water and Sanitation, and basically most importantly they are responsible for water resource management, planning and making sure that there's water. Then you go to local government, where municipalities are water service providers. So they are responsible for water provision. Where do they source that water from? They would get it from the water boards, who then abstract, treat, and then sell it to the municipalities, and then the municipalities would obviously then distribute it to the people. We also have got, in between that, what we call water service authorities. So it is in the Water Services Act. The authority would, in essence, have to have oversight over the water service provision. And unfortunately in South Africa, you find that most cases, the very municipality that is a water service authority is the water service provider. So who's policing who? That is the first part. But in terms of the infrastructure at the current moment as it is the responsibility of the water service provider, which is the municipality, to provide drinking water and proper infrastructure. When there is infrastructure in this condition, the municipalities would apply to the Department of Water and Sanitation. They would use their water infrastructure grants to be able to upgrade the water treatment works. So I think we'll also have one of the service providers also commenting on that. But this infrastructure dates back prior to 1994. So in essence, the minister is empowered to take over the powers of the water service provision, to repair the wastewater treatment works, and to hand it and then to be able to hand it over. Similar to what you say is an administration function of the municipality. But it's very difficult because the water service provision as a function of the municipality is not a standalone. So you would not have the budget, you would not have the people, you would just literally have the power. And therein lies the challenge. And I think from other work that we have done at the Water Research Commission, we said it is critical to relook the business of water service provision for safety of people. Maybe it does not lie within the right sphere of government and local government. So the responsibility to fix wastewater treatment works and ensure that people get healthy water, it's the municipalities. But at a higher level, there is potential to take over and implement. And I think there has been commitments that have been made around the overhauling of the treatment works and making sure that people get clean water.
Around your question. So we did not go into the community and test the water that we were actually using in their houses. I mean, I think you would appreciate that at that time there was a lot going on for the community, and the focus was really to make sure that they had access to treatment, and we also didn't want to get involved with the messaging that I think the Department of Health was really rolling out in terms of just getting them to respond if they were not feeling well. So we didn't do that, but what we did test was the hydrants that they were supposed to get water from. So if tankers were supposed to go to a certain hydrant to get water, we were supposed to test from there. But I think importantly though is the fact that we do want our communities to be drinking from as few sources as possible. That is really the key thing, because right now everybody, like you said, there's so many different ways people are storing water, and if there's an outbreak, you would need basically to go and test everybody's water source. But if you do know that your community is getting water from Temba or from Clifton or from a certain pipeline, then immediately an outbreak happens, you go directly there and you test. And I think also importantly, the burden of putting household water treatment on communities, I think it's really a lot to bear. You know, you want people to be able to have water, open their taps, it's treated to an acceptable standard, and it's enough for them to use for their day-to-day activities.
And just to give a reflection in terms of the work that we did, because that's very important for us.
Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and members of the media. I'm honored to have an opportunity to share some insight, on this very important topic. My name is Nora Motar from Cubic M Africa. So to provide some context, Hammanskraal region consists of multiple types of settlements which receive varied levels of water and sanitation, of water sources, which each playing a crucial role in meeting. So the water from no running water, and it's also supplemented by the water tankers for drinking purposes. And lastly, like Dr. Yunis has said, there is also commercially available bottled water. So when it comes to sanitation and hygiene, there are various types of sanitation facilities available, including the flush toilets, chemical toilets, pit latrines, and septic tanks. And we have observed, that in some areas of the informal settlements where reticulated water and flush toilets are present, intermittent water supply is prevalent, which hinders, the proper flushing of toilets, as well as the good hygiene practices. So as a result, the residents are then, forced to share, to use shared pit latrines, which increases the risk of cholera transmission. So in rural areas, most households they rely on pit latrines, although some, have a small number have installed tanks with flush toilets. So the lack of access, to running water and proper hygiene facilities can be problematic, as it poses challenges in minimizing exposure to cholera transmission. Also, as already mentioned, most wash basins, which were previously installed outside the outdoor toilets, particularly in the RDP sections, they are no longer available because they have detached from the walls. So the absence of reliable supply of running water, and proper hygiene facilities, including soap, within the toilet area, implies that, most residents seldomly wash their hands with soap after using the toilet, leaving the community vulnerable to the risk of cholera transmission. In light of what has been said, it is crucial to have access to a reliable supply of clean water, adequate sanitation, and hygiene infrastructure as a mitigation measure, to prevent cholera transmission. Should be implemented to promote good hygiene practices and minimize, the community's exposure to cholera. Those initiatives could weigh in on, the importance of regular and, regular hand washing, or the use of sanitizers, more so in areas with no running water. And also, regular maintenance of toilets, especially if shared between families. Emphasis should be placed on the importance of boiling water, or honoring the boil water notices that are issued by the municipalities in the event of adverse water quality incidents. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm Dr. Erika du Plessis from the University of Pretoria. Our focus was to look at the irrigation water quality that our formal and predominantly informal farming community are using for irrigation of fresh produce. We take a project where we identified 2 smallholder farmers that might be a higher risk as far as other contaminants are concerned, E. coli and Salmonella, for example, that have also been mentioned. And we also identified 2 additional farms in the high-risk area, being Arpies River, Karlplaasspruit Dam, that are used for irrigation by very smallholder farmers, but also some larger-scale fresh tea. And market access, which is really, really so important, especially for our smallholder farmers. Our smallholder farmers supplying all the peri-urban areas. The sewage pipe has been flowing into the Karlplaasspruit for the past 2 months. This has been brought under the attention of the authorities, and the farmers are desperate. The dam, when we went there first time a month ago, was still fairly good looking. At this stage, it is black. It looks like sewage water. They are frantic. They are beyond themselves. There has been a report around about when this outbreak started about a smallholder farmer saying he cannot use his borehole water anymore. It's impacted also his value of his property very negatively, his ability to resell. We did find, as Dr. Eunice has said, Vibrio cholerae strain, yet to be confirmed if it is a toxigenic strain. So I have to emphasize, not identified as the pandemic strain yet. We have sent it to the NICD for further analysis and confirmation at the molecular level. So we forget about that. Also the image this problem and this big challenge has for farmers, and especially for our smallholder farmers, it creates such a negative image to the outside world. Can we produce safe food? That's questions that are raised if this happens in a community like Hammanskraal. And it is a fresh produce production area.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jaap Wilsnacht from Virtual Consulting Engineers. I would like to start by acknowledging the rest of my team. I'm in a sense only the messenger here,
Yes.
annex that in some way come together. We involved the University of Stellenbosch, represented by Prof. Gideon Wolfhard and Christoph Tutor. They have worked in the past on the Appies River, looking at environmental health risks. So this is going into the field of micropollutants and endocrine disruption. This work was done a few years prior to the actual cholera outbreak, so it was interesting to look at how they and the results that they found cholera with that was work done by CHC Mariti Mosa, who's sitting here, who's also actually part of another team, I think. And from our office, Cesar McCarthy, mechanical engineer, looking at the equipment of both plants, Royal as well as Timber, in great detail. So we've actually done thorough assessment. Then we looked at the one positive response to cholera vibrio, and it was with the very first sampling run that was done immediately after the project started. So it was the 6th of June. A grad sample, and it was from the 5 stations that we looked at, and these 5 stations were exactly the same as those used by Stellenbosch University. The very last one, the furthest downstream, in other words, downstream of Hammanskraal, is the only positive result that we found. We then, in our second run, worked with composite samplers. Those were collected on the 12th to the 14th of June, installed and collected 2 days later. So they then capture larger amounts of water as it flows through the sample. We actually have the debris and solids that's catched and caught by the samplers. There we didn't see any response or any positive detection of the cholera bacteria. But what we did see is a lot of other bacteria, Shigella, Salmonella, and really shocking levels of E. coli. So these are similar bacteria. Cholera is also, I think it's a gram-negative bacteria, which just means that what it means is that it's part of the same family, and it infects the intestines, and it can lead to quite severe disease because it's got a shell, and the membrane of the bacteria is such that it's not easily attacked. So this is sort of a family of bacteria, and I think the focus on cholera is maybe slightly misplaced, as serious as it is, because we see all these other bacteria as well that can make you equally sick and lead to death. It was also very interesting, and the micropollutants. And the micropollutants are things like antibiotics, antidepressants, antiretrovirals, simple painkillers, illicit drugs, and then some chemicals, finally water, as well as herbicides and poisons, basically. So all of these interfere with the endocrine system, and that's another health risk. The concentrations in the Appies River is extremely high. That all the other risks are associated with it. As jy doodgewone E. coli in die water kry, dan weet jy maar die res is ook dan. Okay, the source of this is the wastewater treatment plant. So that was the second part of our study. The case of Rooiwal is really a sad case. The plant dates back to the 1980s. And I think both past and current administrations need to account for the fact that it's in that state. The plant is in a severe state of neglect. I would say 1/3 of the equipment and 1/3 of the process units more or less functions, but not quite. Even if the plant was fully functional, it receives more wastewater than it could treat in terms of its design capacity. The plant also consists of 2 or 3 parts. The western works is completely out of commission. The northern works, which is the biological nutrient removal activated sludge works, should do the bulk of the work, but it can't because of its state of neglect. And then the eastern works is a very old biofilter system that's maybe from the 60s or 70s. That's really old technology, and you can't expect that type of technology to meet effluent standards. Still, that's no excuse for the lack of maintenance, the lack of site keeping, the poor data collection, sort of lack of interest in making sure that the information gathered makes sense, and using that information to actually improve the plant operations. You see the same sort of neglect in terms of the solid waste, and what we've seen there is, what we've done is to collect or to identify from those 99 high-level identifications, go to those which we consider to be more high risk, and high risk would be solid waste sites where there's both a clear source of waste as well as a pathway towards a receptor. So typically a stream or a pond or a dam where there's a risk of transmission and movement of possibly bacteria. And after we've identified those and narrowed down, we also did find there similar conditions to that in the Appice River. So that's within the Hammanskraal settlement. Small streams running through. Some of these streams are clearly overflowing sewers based on the water quality that we tested. But then some are not clearly sewage because the chemical qualities are such that you think this is more likely drinking water that's leaking and it's running through solid waste sites. But also there did we see high concentrations of E. coli as well as the other pathogens, Salmonella and Shigella. And then lastly we look at the Temba drinking water works, and I think this is to me the crux of the matter. In our neighbouring countries, Namibia, the city of Windhoek is actually a world leader in direct reclamation of wastewater. We make drinking water from that. They advertise this, it's public knowledge, and they're quite proud of doing it that way. We're doing the same at Temba in a sense, but we're not doing it well. We're doing it very poorly because that's direct effluent reclamation to drinking water. The water coming from Rooiwal to Leeuwkraal Dam is in essence poorly treated wastewater, which is the raw water for the Temba drinking water plant. We think the plant is not in as bad a condition as both the Rooiwal and the Temba wastewater treatment plant. So there's room to improve there, but there's a lot of work to be done in terms of the operations and process control at Temba. Chemical dosing is not done correctly. There's a lot of the chemical dosing equipment that's simply not used. It could be used, but it's not used. Potassium permanganate is not used. The ozone installation is not functional. It's not used. It's not in operation, although it could be. And then the type of chemicals is not well understood. What chemicals are used to remove solids from the raw water? There's an opportunity to use either polymer that binds solids and remove that in the settling process, or to use ferrichloride. Bacterial counts. As you go through the different steps of the process, you would hope to see log reductions with each step. But it remains extremely high until the very last point, which is the chlorination of the works. And what this means is that the plant is run with extremely high water safety risk and relies solely on chlorine for the disinfection. The chlorine is functional, it's a good system. Although in terms of the photos that you saw, there's definitely room for improvement. And to maintain that system better is definitely a requirement. But when it's used properly, it's functional. The risk is that if it's not there, and what we've seen, the chemical condition of the water, as well as the high concentration, the high counts of pathogens in the water, the reliance on a single barrier is not wise. And this is the case. So we rely only on this one barrier for disinfection, especially when you know the source of the water. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Any second round of questions? Anyone, please?
From Vietnamese agency from Vietnam from a tropical country, we are very concerned about cholera. Like when we have tropical storms and we have waterlogging and floods everywhere in the country. So we base here and we kind of curious, like why is the cholera become so severe this time? Do you notice any abnormalities or changes maybe in lifestyle or in the climate or weather or anything that may cause the disease become so severe? And also you mentioned about the commissioner already mentioned some recommendation to solve the disease. And I would like to ask who would be responsible for implementing such recommendation. You can maybe name some maybe sectors or department or someone, and where does the budget come from to solve to implement such recommendation? And here is as well.
Thanks. Any more questions? Diane was first.
Patricia Pasaka from the SABC. Going back to the recommendations, the water challenges and sanitation related challenges in Hammanskraal have been coming for very long now. Going back to the recommendations, is there a timeline that the Water Research Commission would like to see the recommendations being fulfilled to obviously protect the people there and maybe the rest of the capital city?
Thank you, Rasad Adams with Network 24 and Beyond Lady. I just want to know what happens in the interim. I mean, obviously there were very shocking revelations made here about the state of the Arpies River. You've mentioned that parts of the river that flows out of the Themba water treatment plant did test positive for worrying levels of bacteria. But the last time we spoke to the MMC for utilities, he said that residents can be assured that water coming from the Themba wastewater treatment plant is safe for household purposes. Is that still the case? Are residents still encouraged to, trust water coming from Themba, since that was on a conducted test and assured that water coming from Themba is safe for household, not consumption, household purposes? And then in terms of, I think, dead fishes flowing on the water, and that water is definitely not standing still. It's moving downstream. Have you been in contact with any other, farmers or other households that are situated along that stream to inform them that, listen, the water coming down here is definitely contaminated with sewage? You've mentioned that it has been sold to several areas in Tshwane. Just in terms of that, are you in communication with residents down that stream to tell them, listen, sewage is being flown into the stream? Thank you.
It will allow the leaders of the panel to answer the three questions, and then we'll take another round.
Presentation here today and what you just said regarding the office. Are you basically saying to the residents that you still do not have the main, specific source of the contamination? And also, are we likely to see you continue with your test, given that the residents, they are still panicking? We still have a lot of them who are still experiencing gastrointestinal symptoms, including myself. And are we likely to see you continue with your, investigations?
Maybe to start with your question. So the Water Research Commission, we do research not just focused on this. Water and health is one of our areas of focus, water security, water use. So we do a suite of research, and in this case, we specifically needed to do this. We've provided recommendations that are not only classically going to be relevant for this case of Hammanskraal. It is relevant for all other areas where there's limited water availability, where infrastructure is not optimized to ensure that there's proper wash, so water and sanitation hygiene. And also we have made a recommendation. The first point of call here is education and awareness before they use it for whatever purposes. Then where the hires were much higher, where the numbers were much higher. So the critical thing here is that it should not even happen. We need to be saying, when we have this high level of E. coli, we need to be concerned and do the further test and say what is causing that. Now we've painted the picture, the infrastructure is not working, that's not going to improve, and therefore people should be also educated around boiling and its uses and all of those things. Whose responsibility is it? I think I've painted the picture around the different spheres and the involvement and the model of water service delivery, which is of the concern. And as a result, I mean, there's budgets for infrastructure at municipal level. Is that being prioritized adequately to sort out this problem? COPTA funds municipalities for infrastructure grants. Are those being used? Is this project part of the budget? Because you spend, you budget, you spend, you do APPs. But now that we've had this kind of an outbreak, who has taken responsibility? The commitments that have been made, I think that's what we need to be following up on, to say how far are you, so that the finger pointing stops, the powers that be integrate their resources, and they deliver on this as soon as possible. That for me becomes the winner. It's not how long, I can't put a time frame, and I know infrastructure doesn't take overnight, but which will reusing water. And I think we need to start demystifying water reuse, because water is a limited resource. Population growth and the growth of urbanization and people coming into close contact with our resources means that the value chain from source to tap and back to source, it's becoming closer and a closed loop. And now it is very critical around our wastewater treatment works that need to be adapted to with innovation and technologies that will enable safety of the water. That is the winner. So the Water Research Commission, we've done a lot of work around innovative technologies, not only around drinking water, also the wastewater treatment works, also sanitation technology, for specifically those areas where there's limited water resource availability, where there isn't adequate water to be shared between water, sanitation, and the unowned treatment systems. So it is really about the uptake of this innovation. It's a return on investment that government needs to realize and say, we are going to use this new technology in these areas that has been innovated in research and development that is done at the Commission. Yes?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the media house you're from, the lady from Vietnam. Yeah, but I think in my introduction, I tried to paint very briefly a picture of what's happening with cholera globally. And I think when the WHO, obviously, which has an oversight of all these waterborne diseases, says that cholera is a high threat, then it's something that we have to sort of start perking up and sitting up around, even though South Africa is not endemic. And it's a multifaceted, because there is a new strain that has come onto the continent, and I think our National Institute of Communicable Diseases has really done fantastic work in terms of typing the different moving around. So you find that you have this massive outbreak in Malawi that has been, it's a cholera endemic, but the numbers are really high compared to usual. Then on the backdrop of that also, we do know that there's extreme weather variables now. Climatic conditions are changing, and I think that the Hammanskraal situation also kind of gives a micro picture of that, because in that February month, 3 times the amount of rainfall that you would not usually have, and we know cholera is linked to extreme climate variability. So I think as a Water Research Commission, if we think about some of the research we can do, it's really about developing like hotspots. So we know you have the climate issue, we know we have people mobility moving up and down, and it's not just Hammanskraal, it's cross-border. We have to also accept that. But so it's drawing maps where we know that, okay, there's a lot of inter-movement. Climate variability points to the fact that if the organism is the environment, it can survive. And then also we don't have adequate wash services. So that is the type of mapping to start designing responses that make sense when an outbreak happens.
Okay, final round of questions. Any questions virtually?
Not yet.
Okay.
Yeah. Hi there. Thanks for a detailed presentation from everyone. I'm Julia Evans from the Daily Maverick. Can we get a confirmation on the current death toll? I know you said that when you started your investigation it was 20 and then more happens. I just want a confirmation on the death toll. With the awareness campaign, is it not frustrating for people in the community to hear this? If we were to write this in an article, is that not frustrating for people to hear, because this has been an issue that's been going on for more than a decade? Have there been previous awareness campaigns that have failed? This is not a final question, because I'm a climate journalist, I just think it's interesting. Climate change is going to make extreme events something that we need to be concerned about, or if we have functioning wastewater treatment works, which obviously we don't right now, would that be fine, or is that something we need to work into our adaptation for climate change? Thanks.
Thanks, Monique. Anyone else? Final chance? The back? No hand. Okay, we'll make that the final question.
Okay, all right. Thank you for your question, Lady Margaret. I think I'll start in the CEO can post it. So I think that would be the best place to get that type of information. Then, yeah, I do agree with you, and I think the Water Research Commission does, because we've been in existence for 50 years, and we have always supported campaigns around WASH. And it is frustrating for communities when they know that it rests on them. But in that aspect, though, because obviously lives are at stake, we have to keep on with that information. It cannot be overridden, or we can't stop, because if we can't get our not just replace, but build new infrastructure and new ways of servicing in light of climate change that's coming along. Yeah. So you asked the question around last year and this year, the earlier one and the one that's going to come. It's indicating that there's really slow progress in the revolutionary change that must be seen very quickly. And therefore we then looked at that, and we have some options that have been provided to say it needs to be relooked. Obviously that might require legislation. Outbreak very early and very quickly, and people die. But we have also looked at chemicals of emerging concerns, different types. Some are coming out of the agricultural industry, from pharmaceuticals, from cosmetics industry. So that is where we need to be saying we need to be having national implementation plans around managing these chemicals of emerging concerns, and saying what gets imported into the country in terms of chemicals, how are those managed? How do we produce our fertilizers? Are they biodegradable? So the bigger questions, the research questions that we've been asking. But I think, ladies and gentlemen, we're here for a specific reason, and we will keep you the whole day here with the work that we're doing at the Water Research Commission, and we really appreciate you being here and the work that's been done. We thank you to the colleagues. And Oh, okay, and then yes, ladies and gentlemen, in closing, the final report and the detailed report and information will be uploaded on our website, will be accessible. The colleagues are accessible to decode whatever it's technical, it's found to be technical in order to be explained. But we also want to, even more than this, take this and simplify it and make sure that we also make this information accessible to the community. This work has planted a seed of not just this work, we will be extrapolating and looking at other areas, as I've indicated, which are facing a similar risk, and we will be making the ministerial and brief and then make sure that the relevant authorities from our minister to the municipalities understand that they start planning well, because we are now going into the dry season, which is winter, and therefore there will be less water available, and then some of these recommendations really need to be implemented. And in this case, we have shared the report with the City of Tshwane and as well as our colleagues in the department. So we'd like to thank you very much. And we'd like to thank the Press Club for hosting the WRC press conference in light of the release of the findings of this study. Thank you very much.
Okay, colleagues, that marks the end of this briefing. Thanks for your time. We'll see you again soon. Sorry, just one final announcement. We have a networking session tomorrow. Most of you may have seen the invite by now. Tomorrow night. Tomorrow evening.
Thank you, yes. We have to thank you. She should be. Next. No. Sorry, you may pass me my bag and stuff.
This beautiful one.
She's not being nice. Thank you, Laura. That's just well.
Okay. Okay, so you know.
Came across well.
Oh no, I got you saying on the sign, yeah. Yeah.